Blood pounded in Beatrice's ears as the flight attendant's hand clamped down on her shoulder, fingernails digging into her favorite cardigan. Humiliation burned her cheeks as 30 first-class passengers stared their whispers, filling the tense cabin air. She was being treated like a criminal, threatened with arrest and removal from the London-bound flight, simply for stepping toward the cockpit door. But the smug airline staff had no idea who was sitting behind that locked, reinforced steel. 32 years of double shifts, aching arches, and the sterile smell of hospital bleach had brought Beatrice Monroe to this exact moment. Sitting on the edge of her modest floral bedspread in suburban Atlanta, the 58-year-old widow stared at the heavy cardstock of the boarding pass, resting in her weathered hands. The bold black letters spelled out her name, followed by a designation she had only ever seen in movies: first class. Seat. Way. Beatrice traced the embossed lettering with a trembling thumb. Her late husband, Arthur, had been an aviation mechanic for over 3 decades. He had spent his entire life covered in engine grease, coming home smelling of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel, fixing the massive birds that carried wealthy people across the oceans. Arthur had never owned a passport. He had never flown on a commercial jet. He used to sit on their back porch, pointing up at the contrails streaking across the Georgia sky, telling their young daughter Alyssa that one day she was going to be the one flying them. Arthur didn't live to see that prophecy come true. A sudden heart attack took him when Alyssa was only 19, just as she was beginning her grueling journey through flight school. From that day on, Beatrice had carried the financial and emotional weight of her daughter's dreams entirely on her own shoulders. She had mortgaged the house twice. She had picked up every weekend nursing shift available at Emory University Hospital. She had worn the same winter coat for 12 years, so Alyssa could afford the exorbitant simulator fees, the check rides, and the endless aviation manuals. And Alyssa had done it. Against every systemic barrier, against a fiercely competitive and male-dominated industry, against the whispers of instructors who didn't believe a young black woman from a blue-collar neighborhood had the right stuff, Alyssa had soared. Today, at 32 years old, Captain Alyssa Monroe was commanding her first transatlantic flight for Meridian Airlines, Flight 408 from Atlanta to London Heathrow. To celebrate, Alyssa had used her hard-earned seniority and pilot privileges to secure her mother the best seat on the aircraft. "You're going to sit up front." "Mama," Alyssa had told her over the phone the night before, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to drink champagne before takeoff, and you're going to let them wait on you for a change. You earned this just as much as I did." Tucking the boarding pass safely into her purse, Beatrice stood up and smoothed down her carefully chosen outfit, a tailored navy blue slack set and a soft cream cardigan. She wanted to look the part. She wanted Arthur to be proud. But more than anything, she wanted to honor the small velvet box currently sitting at the bottom of her handbag. Inside that box was Arthur's vintage silver pocket watch, heavily engraved with his initials and a pair of pilot's wings. She had promised him on his deathbed that the day Alyssa captained her first international heavy jet, she would give it to her. Arriving at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the sheer scale of Terminal F was overwhelming. Beatrice bypassed the snaking, chaotic lines of economy check-in and nervously approached the red-carpeted priority lane. She felt entirely out of place among the bespoke suits and designer luggage surrounding her, but she held her head high. When she reached the desk, the check-in agent, a severe-looking woman whose name tag read Patricia, didn't even look up at first. "Ma'am, economy check-in is at counters 40 through 60, Patricia said, her voice dripping with practiced corporate dismissal. Beatrice's spine stiffened. "I am in the correct line. I need to check my bag for London." Patricia finally looked up, her eyes flicking over Beatrice's modest but neat clothing, a subtle calculation happening behind her frosted makeup. Slowly she extended a hand. "Boarding pass and passport, please." Beatrice handed them over. Patricia slid the passport through the scanner, her brow furrowing, as she looked at her computer screen. She typed something aggressively on her keyboard. She looked at the screen, then at Beatrice, then back at the screen. "Is there a problem?" Beatrice asked, her voice steady, though her heart was beginning to race. She was intimately familiar with this specific type of scrutiny. It was the same scrutiny she faced when shopping in high-end department stores, the unspoken assumption that she somehow didn't belong in spaces designated for the elite. "This is a first-class ticket, Mrs. Monroe," Patricia said slowly, as if explaining a complex math problem to a toddler. "It appears to be a company-issued priority pass. Are you an employee of Meridian Airlines?" "No," Beatrice replied, maintaining eye contact. "My daughter is." Patricia let out a small, patronizing hum. "I see. Well, company passes are subject to availability, and sometimes they require secondary clearance. I'm going to need to see your employee sponsorship card." "My daughter assured me everything was in the system. The ticket is confirmed. Seat 2A. Patricia sighed heavily, a masterclass in passive aggression. She picked up a desk phone and dialed a number, speaking in hushed, irritated tones, while Beatrice stood there, hyper-aware of the wealthy white businessman behind her, who was shifting his weight and checking his Rolex with an exaggerated huff. After 3 agonizing minutes, Patricia slammed the phone down. "It's cleared," she said curtly, slapping a heavy priority tag onto Beatrice's suitcase. She handed the passport and boarding pass back without making eye contact. "Security is to your left." No apology. No, "have a nice flight." Just a cold dismissal. Beatrice took a deep breath, collected her documents, and walked away. She would not let a bitter gate agent ruin the greatest day of her life. She was going to London, and her brilliant daughter was flying the plane. Nothing was going to take away her joy. Boarding the massive Boeing 777 was an experience Beatrice could scarcely comprehend. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, smelling of rich leather, fresh linen, and expensive cologne. Her seat 2A was essentially a private suite. It had a massive screen, a plush duvet, and a wide window that looked out over the sprawling tarmac. As she settled into the oversized seat, Beatrice felt a profound sense of awe. She thought of Arthur, imagining him out there on the tarmac in his neon safety vest, marshalling the planes, deafened by the roar of the engines. "We made it, Artie," she whispered to herself, brushing away a rogue tear. "Our little girl is running the show today." "Excuse me, Mom." The voice was excessively sweet, coating a layer of ice. Beatrice looked up to see a flight attendant standing in the aisle. She was tall, with impeccably styled blonde hair pulled into a tight French twist, her uniform pristine. Her name tag shone under the cabin lights. Brenda, Purser. "Can I help you?" Beatrice asked politely. "I just need to see your boarding pass one more time," Brenda said, offering a tight, manufactured smile. "Just ensuring everyone is in their correct cabin before I close the manifest." Beatrice noticed that Brenda hadn't asked to see the boarding pass of the gentleman in 1A, nor the elderly couple settling into row 3. She swallowed the familiar lump of frustration in her throat, unzipped her purse, and handed the heavy cardstock to the flight attendant. Brenda looked at it, her perfectly arched eyebrows twitching slightly. "Beatrice Monroe, seat 2A. Very well. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, water orange juice?" "Champagne, please," Beatrice said smoothly. Alyssa had told her to order it, and by God she was going to. Brenda's smile strained a fraction of an inch. "Of course. I'll have that right out." As the cabin continued to fill and the final preparations for departure commenced, Beatrice retrieved the small velvet box from her purse. She opened it, running her thumb over the cold silver of Arthur's watch. The hands ticked rhythmically. It was almost time for pushback. Alyssa had told her that once the boarding doors were closed, the cockpit was strictly off-limits, locked down by reinforced steel and federal regulations. If Beatrice was going to get this good luck charm to her daughter before her inaugural transatlantic takeoff, she had to do it now. Beatrice unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The front galley was only about 15 feet away, a small curtained-off area that separated the luxury of first class from the heavily secured door of the flight deck. She walked softly down the carpeted aisle, clutching the velvet box to her chest. She reached the galley just as Brenda was pouring a row of pre-departure drinks. "Excuse me," Beatrice said softly. Brenda spun around, nearly spilling a glass of sparkling water. The flight attendant's eyes immediately hardened, the professional veneer instantly evaporating. Ma'am, you need to remain in your seat. We are preparing for departure." Brenda snapped her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I know I'm sorry to interrupt," Beatrice said, keeping her tone respectful and calm. "I just need to pass something to the captain before the door closes. It will only take a second." Brenda physically stepped forward, blocking the narrow passageway that led to the cockpit door. "That is absolutely out of the question. Passengers are not permitted in the forward galley, and you certainly cannot approach the flight deck. Return to your seat immediately." "You don't understand," Beatrice tried to explain, holding up the small velvet box. "I don't need to go inside. I just need you to hand this to the captain. It's a family heirloom. A good luck charm for the flight." Brenda stared at the box as if it were a live grenade. Her training in post-9/11 security protocols, combined with her own deeply ingrained prejudices, triggered an immediate and hostile reaction. She saw a black woman behaving irregularly, holding an unidentified object, trying to gain access to the most secure area of the aircraft. "I am not taking any suspicious packages into the cockpit," Brenda said, her voice rising in volume. Several passengers in the front rows, including the businessman in 1A, turned their heads to watch the commotion. "It's not a suspicious package, it's a pocket watch," Beatrice said, her own frustration finally beginning to leak into her voice. She opened the box to show Brenda. "Look, it's just a watch. My daughter—" "I don't care what it is," Brenda interrupted loudly. "You are violating Federal Aviation regulations by refusing a direct crew member instruction. If you do not return to seat 2A right this second, I will call the gate agent and have you removed from this aircraft." The threat hung in the air, heavy and violent. Beatrice felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. She had worked too hard, endured too much, and sacrificed too fiercely to be humiliated like this on the most important day of her family's life. "I am not a threat, and I am not a criminal," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding register that she usually reserved for unruly patients in the trauma ward. "I am asking you a simple favor. Hand this watch to the captain." "That's it," Brenda hissed. She grabbed the intercom phone off the galley wall and slammed her finger onto the emergency dial button. "Ground control. This is Brenda at the forward door. I need a gate supervisor and security on board immediately. We have a disruptive passenger." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted from relaxed luxury to tense, suffocating silence. Beatrice stood her ground in the galley, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the velvet box. She could feel the collective gaze of the cabin burning into her back. "Just sit down, lady," muttered the businessman in seat 1A, aggressively rustling his newspaper. "Some of us have connections to make in London." "I have done nothing wrong," Beatrice stated to the cabin at large, though her voice wavered slightly. The sheer injustice of the situation was a physical weight on her chest. If a wealthy white passenger had asked a flight attendant to pass a note or a gift to the pilot, they would have been met with a smile and a "right away, sir." But Beatrice was immediately branded a threat, a disruption, an unwanted element that needed to be purged. Within 2 minutes, heavy footsteps pounded down the jet bridge. The main cabin door was still open, and through it stepped Gregory Walsh, a senior gate agent for Meridian Airlines. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a red face and an aggressive, authoritative stride. He was followed closely by a security contractor in a yellow high-visibility vest. "What's the situation, Brenda?" Gregory demanded, stepping into the galley and instantly boxing Beatrice in. "This passenger refuses to return to her seat," Brenda said, pointing an accusing, manicured finger at Beatrice. She approached the flight deck restricted area and attempted to force a package on me to give to the pilots. When I told her to sit down, she became belligerent and refused. "That is a lie," Beatrice said fiercely. "I wasn't belligerent. I opened the box to show her it was just a pocket watch." Gregory didn't even look at the box. He looked at Beatrice with absolute contempt. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter what it is. You don't approach the cockpit, and you don't argue with the flight crew. Grab your bags. You're off the flight." The words struck Beatrice like a physical blow. Off the flight. She was going to miss Alyssa's first takeoff. She was going to be escorted through the terminal like a criminal. Arthur's watch would never make it across the ocean. "No," Beatrice said, planting her feet. "I am not leaving. I have a valid ticket. I have not caused a disturbance, and I have a right to be here." "You lost that right the second you threatened my crew," Gregory barked. He took a step forward, invading Beatrice's personal space, trying to use his sheer size to intimidate her into submission. "I am giving you one lawful order to disembark this aircraft. If you do not comply, I will have airport police drag you off in handcuffs, and you will be placed on the federal no-fly list. Is that what you want?" Tears of pure, unadulterated fury pricked the corners of Beatrice's eyes. She had spent her entire life shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. She had bitten her tongue when doctors talked down to her at the hospital. She had smiled through the microaggressions at the bank when she asked for loans. She had swallowed her pride 1,000 times so Alyssa could have a better life. But not today. Today she was Captain Monroe's mother, and she was not going to be bullied in her daughter's house. "Do not speak to me like a child," Beatrice warned, her voice vibrating with a quiet, dangerous power. "And do not threaten me. You have no idea what is going on here." "I know I have a delayed plane and a crazy woman in my galley," Gregory shouted, entirely losing his temper. He reached out and forcefully grabbed Beatrice by her upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into her flesh, through the soft wool of her cardigan. "Get your hands off me!" Beatrice cried out, jerking her arm away. The velvet box slipped from her grasp, hitting the galley floor. The lid snapped open, and the silver pocket watch spilled out, skidding across the linoleum until it hit the heavy, reinforced steel of the cockpit door with a sharp clack. "That's it! Security, get her out of here now!" Gregory yelled. The contractor stepped forward, reaching for Beatrice's other arm. Brenda stood in the corner, a look of smug satisfaction on her face as she watched the older woman being manhandled. "I told you to just sit down," she muttered. Panic seized Beatrice's chest. She was actually being thrown off. They were going to hurt her. Over the rising din of the angry gate agent and the murmuring passengers, Beatrice did the only thing a mother could do when she was backed into a corner. She called for her child. "Alyssa!" Beatrice screamed, projecting her voice as loudly as she could toward the steel door. "Alyssa, it's Mama!" Gregory sneered, grabbing her arm again, twisting it slightly this time to force her toward the exit. "She's out of her mind. Lady, nobody in there can hear you, and even if they could, they aren't coming out to save you. Move." But Gregory was wrong. The The cockpit of a Boeing 777 is heavily soundproofed, but it is not entirely soundproof. The sharp clack of the metal watch hitting the bottom of the door had caught the attention of First Officer Thomas Gable, who had glanced at the camera feed from the galley. And the muffled, desperate scream of the word "Mama" had penetrated the headset of the woman in the left seat. Just as the security contractor clamped his hand over Beatrice's wrist to drag her toward the jet bridge, a loud, mechanical whirring sound echoed through the galley. Gregory froze. Brenda gasped, taking a step back. The heavy reinforced lock of the cockpit door disengaged with a heavy metallic thunk. The unwritten rule of aviation security was absolute. Once boarding began, the cockpit door remained sealed. It was never opened for a passenger disturbance. Never. Yet the heavy steel door slowly swung outward on its hinges. The tense, chaotic noise in the galley instantly vanished, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. Even the businessman in 1A dropped his newspaper. Everyone stared at the dark threshold of the flight deck, waiting to see what would emerge. First, a pristine white sleeve with 4 heavy gold stripes wrapped around the wrist reached out and caught the edge of the door. Then the captain stepped out into the galley. Captain Alyssa Munro stood in the threshold of the flight deck, an imposing vision of absolute, undeniable authority. She was dressed in the crisp, immaculate uniform of a Meridian Airlines captain, a tailored navy blazer, a white shirt collar sharply framing her face, and the unmistakable 4 heavy gold stripes wrapped proudly around her wrists and epaulets. A golden aviation wings pin rested perfectly above her left breast pocket, right over her heart. The silence in the first-class cabin was so profound that the soft hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit sounded like a roaring waterfall. Alyssa's sharp, dark eyes scanned the chaotic scene in her forward galley. She saw Brenda the purser pressed against the bulkhead with a look of deer-in-the-headlights terror. She saw the yellow-vested security contractor looking confused, and then her gaze locked onto the large, red-faced gate agent whose meaty hand was actively twisting her 60-year-old mother's arm. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Take your hands off her," Alyssa commanded. Her voice was not a shout. It was low, dangerously calm, and carried the razor-sharp cadence of a woman who was trained to command multi-million-dollar machinery through hurricanes. Gregory Walsh blinked, completely derailed by the sudden appearance of the pilot. He looked from the captain to the woman in his grasp, his brain struggling to process the interruption. "Captain, I apologize for the noise," Gregory stammered, attempting to project his own misplaced sense of superiority. "We have a security situation. This passenger became belligerent, left her seat, and tried to breach the flight deck. We are removing her from the aircraft so you can commence pushback." Alyssa took a slow, deliberate step out of the cockpit, allowing the heavy steel door to click shut behind her. She did not break eye contact with Gregory. "I said," Alyssa repeated each word, striking like a hammer on an anvil, "take your hands off my mother." The words echoed through the galley and spilled into the first-class cabin. Brenda's jaw dropped so fast she nearly choked on her own breath. The security contractor instantly released Beatrice's wrist, as if he had been burned, taking 3 rapid steps backward, his hands raised in surrender. Gregory froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a mottled, sickly pale. His grip on Beatrice's arm went slack. Your what?" "My mother, Alyssa," said, stepping directly into Gregory's personal space. Though he was 6 inches taller and outweighed her by 100 pounds, Gregory shrank back against the galley counter. "The woman you just assaulted on my aircraft is Beatrice Munro. She is the reason I am wearing these 4 stripes. Now step away from her before I have you arrested for federal battery." Gregory stumbled backward, completely losing his footing and knocking into a stack of plastic beverage cups, sending them scattering across the floor. Alyssa immediately turned her attention to Beatrice. The cold, commanding exterior melted for a fraction of a second as she reached out gently, inspecting her mother's wrists. The red marks from Gregory's fingers were already forming on the dark skin of Beatrice's arm. "Mama, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Alyssa asked, her voice dropping to a gentle, protective whisper. Beatrice took a shaky breath, her eyes brimming with a mixture of overwhelming pride and residual adrenaline. She straightened her cardigan, her posture returning to its usual dignified stance. "I'm all right, baby. I just wanted to give you something before you left." Beatrice pointed a trembling finger at the floor near the cockpit door. Alyssa followed her mother's gaze. Lying on the grey linoleum, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the galley, was the silver pocket watch. Alyssa felt a massive lump form in her throat. She knelt down her pristine slacks, brushing the floor, and picked it up. The heavy silver was cold to the touch. She ran her thumb over the engraved wings and her father's initials. A.M. Arthur Monroe. Alyssa closed her eyes for a brief second, fighting back the tears that threatened to ruin her professional composure. Her father had worn this watch every single day he worked on the tarmac. He had promised she would fly the planes he fixed. And here it was. She stood back up, clutching the watch tightly in her palm, and slipped it into the breast pocket of her uniform, right behind her captain's wings. She looked at her mother and gave a small, profound nod. An entire lifetime of struggle, sacrifice, and unspoken love was communicated in that single gesture. Then Alyssa turned back to the flight crew. The emotional daughter vanished, and the pilot in command returned. "Captain Monroe, I had no idea." Brenda stammered, her voice shaking violently. Her perfect blonde French twist suddenly looked severe and out of place. "She didn't identify herself as your mother. She just had a package, and protocol dictates." "Protocol?" Alyssa interrupted, taking a step toward the purser. "Let's talk about protocol, Brenda. Did my mother make a bomb threat?" No, but... Did she physically assault a crew member?" "No, Captain. She just wouldn't sit down when I..." "Did you ask her what the item was? Did you look at it? Did you attempt to de-escalate? Or did you instantly assume that a well-dressed black woman in first class must be a security threat the second she asked you a question?" Brenda's face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. The first-class passengers were dead silent, hanging on to every single word. The businessman in 1A, who had previously demanded Beatrice sit down, was now staring at his lap, thoroughly ashamed. "It was a misunderstanding," Gregory interjected, attempting to recover some semblance of his gate authority. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest. "Captain, we have a schedule to keep. Meridian Airlines' policy is clear about disruptive passengers. Mother or not, she caused a disturbance. I was just doing my job." Alyssa slowly turned her piercing gaze back to the gate agent. "Your job," Alyssa said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal octave, "is to safely board passengers and manage the gate. Not to physically assault a 60-year-old woman in my galley. Now listen here, Captain." Gregory said, his ego blinding him to the reality of the situation. He pointed a finger at Alyssa. "I am the senior gate supervisor for Terminal F. I make the call on who is a flight risk. You might fly the plane, but on the ground I control the boarding process, and I say she's a liability." The audacity of the statement hung in the air. A collective gasp rippled through the front rows of the cabin. Alyssa didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply crossed her arms over her chest. Federal Aviation Regulation 91.3. Alyssa recited, her voice echoing with encyclopedic precision. The pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible for, and is the final authority as to the operation of that aircraft. As long as those doors are open, and even after they close, this aircraft is my sovereign territory. Not yours, Gregory. Gregory scoffed, rolling his eyes. Save the legal textbook for the simulator, Captain. I'm telling you, I am taking her off this plane. No, you're not, Alyssa replied. Because if she gets off, I get off. The silence that followed was absolute. Brenda gasped. The security contractor looked like he wanted to sink through the floorboards. You can't do that. Gregory sputtered his face, turning from red to purple. This is a packed Boeing 777. You have 340 passengers heading to London. You are the scheduled captain. You cannot abandon your post over a personal dispute. Watch me, Alyssa challenged smoothly. This isn't a personal dispute. This is a safety and crew resource management issue. I cannot in good conscience command a transatlantic flight, knowing that my purser is prone to racial profiling and panic, and that the gate supervisor is violent toward passengers. You have created a hostile and unsafe operating environment. Alyssa unclipped the radio mic from her epaulette. First Officer Gable. Alyssa spoke into the mic, communicating with the cockpit. Cancel the pushback clearance. Kill the APU. We are holding at the gate indefinitely. Copy that, Captain. Holding at the gate. Thomas Gable's voice crackled back through the overhead speakers. The low hum of the aircraft engines suddenly whined down into complete silence. Panic seized Gregory's features. Delaying an international wide-body jet cost an airline tens of thousands of dollars a minute in gate fees, missed connections, and fuel penalties. A cancelled flight of this magnitude was a career-ending disaster for a gate supervisor. You are throwing away your career, Gregory hissed, taking a step toward her. Meridian Airlines will strip you of your rank for grounding this flight. Meridian Airlines trusted me with a $300 million machine and the lives of over 300 people. Alyssa retorted, standing her ground. I think they will trust my judgment regarding a rogue gate agent. Call Richard Montgomery. Gregory froze. Richard Montgomery was the station director for Meridian Airlines at Hartsfield-Jackson, Gregory's ultimate boss, and a man known for his ruthless efficiency and zero-tolerance policy for operational delays. I am not calling Mr. Montgomery over this, Gregory stammered. Then I will, Alyssa said. She reached over to the galley wall and picked up the intercom phone, punching in a direct speed dial code for terminal operations. Brenda immediately burst into tears. Captain Monroe, please. I have a family. I have 12 years with this company. I was just following security protocols. I didn't know she was your mother. That is exactly the problem, Brenda. Beatrice spoke up, her voice clear and strong. She stepped out from behind her daughter, addressing the weeping flight attendant directly. It shouldn't matter that I am her mother. It shouldn't matter if I am a janitor or a CEO. I treated you with respect. I asked a polite question. You looked at me, saw the color of my skin, saw the class of my ticket, and decided I was a threat. You weaponized your authority against me because of your own prejudice, and that makes you unfit to serve the public. Brenda sobbed into her hands, unable to meet Beatrice's gaze. The heavy authoritative sound of dress shoes pounding down the jet bridge echoed into the cabin. A moment later, Richard Montgomery burst through the aircraft door. He was a distinguished older man, in a charcoal suit, clutching a tablet, breathing heavily. He took one look at the grounded plane, the crying purser, the sweating gate agent, and the furious captain. What in God's name is going on here? Richard demanded. Captain Monroe Tower just called down saying you cancelled pushback. We have 30 planes lined up behind you in the alleyway. We need to go now. We aren't going anywhere, Richard, Alyssa said firmly. She pointed a rigid finger at Gregory and Brenda. until they are removed from my aircraft. Richard blinked, looking at Gregory. Walsh. What did you do? She's holding the flight hostage, Gregory shouted, pointing wildly at Alyssa. Her mother. This woman here tried to breach the cockpit. I came down to remove her per protocol, and Captain Munro is threatening to walk off the job. She's insubordinate. Richard looked at Beatrice. He noted her neat cardigan, her elegant posture, and the bruising on her wrist. Then he looked at his hand-picked captain, a woman who had scored perfectly on every check ride and psychological evaluation Meridian Airlines had ever thrown at her. Captain, Richard asked, his tone shifting from frantic to serious. My mother attempted to hand Brenda a family heirloom to pass to me before the doors closed. Alyssa explained, her voice steady and professional. Brenda refused, escalated the situation, and called Gregory. Gregory boarded my aircraft, refused to assess the situation, verbally threatened my mother, and physically assaulted her. He grabbed her arm and tried to drag her off the plane. I intervened. Richard Montgomery closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He let out a long, exhausted sigh. The sheer stupidity of his ground staff was giving him a migraine. I see, Richard said quietly. It's a lie, Gregory protested, his voice cracking. She's a security risk. Shut up, Walsh! Richard snapped, his eyes flying open, ablaze with fury. He stepped closer to the gate agent. You put your hands on a passenger, a first-class passenger, the mother of the pilot in command. Protocol. Protocol dictates you use your brain. Richard roared, losing his corporate composure entirely. You don't manhandle a 60-year-old woman over a misunderstood question in the galley. Do you have any idea the liability you just opened this airline up to? Richard turned to Brenda, who was still weeping against the bulkhead. And you escalated a simple request into a ground stop for a transatlantic heavy pack your bags. You're off the flight. Brenda gasped, looking up with horrified eyes. Mr. Montgomery, please. Off the flight, Brenda. You are suspended pending a full HR investigation. Get your belongings from the crew rest area and exit the aircraft immediately. Richard then turned back to Gregory. Walsh, hand me your airport badge. Gregory looked like he had been struck by lightning. Sir, I have 20 years. Hand me your badge, or I will have the Port Authority police drag you out of here in handcuffs for battery. Richard threatened, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. You are done here. Go clear out your locker. With shaking, defeated hands, Gregory unclipped his security badge from his belt and handed it over. He didn't say another word. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked out the door, disappearing down the jet bridge. Brenda, clutching a small tote bag and avoiding eye contact with everyone, hurried out right behind him. The tension in the first-class cabin broke like a fever. As Brenda and Gregory were exiled from the aircraft, a spontaneous sound erupted from the seats. It started with a slow clap from an elderly woman in row 3 and quickly rippled through the cabin until the entire first-class section was applauding. Even the wealthy businessman in seat 1A was clapping, nodding his head in respect toward the young captain and her mother. Alyssa let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 minutes. Richard Montgomery turned to Alyssa and Beatrice. His expression softened entirely. He reached out and gently shook Beatrice's hand. Mrs. Monroe. Richard said, his voice laced with genuine remorse. On behalf of Meridian Airlines, I cannot apologize enough for what you just experienced. That is not how we treat our guests, and it is certainly not how we treat the family of our flight crew. Please accept my deepest apologies. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery, Beatrice said graciously. I appreciate your prompt handling of the situation. Captain, Richard turned to Alyssa. I have a reserve purser in the terminal lounge. Her name is Sarah Higgins. She's an absolute professional. I can have her down here in 5 minutes. If we do that, are we good to fly? Alyssa gave a firm nod. Send her down. We'll make up the time in the air. Excellent. Have a safe flight to London, Captain, Richard said before exiting the aircraft to manage the fallout on the ground. While they waited for the replacement crew member, Alyssa turned her full attention back to her mother. The professional barrier melted away once more. She gently placed her hands on Beatrice's shoulders. Are you absolutely sure you're okay to fly, Mama? Alyssa asked, searching her mother's eyes. We can go home right now if you want. I mean it. Beatrice smiled, a radiant, beautiful expression that lit up her entire face. She reached up and cupped her daughter's cheek, her thumb gently brushing against the pristine white collar of the uniform. Alyssa Marie, Beatrice said softly. I have waited my whole life to see this day. Your daddy waited his whole life for this day. Nothing, not a rude stewardess, not a bully at the gate, not the devil himself is going to stop me from sitting in that seat and watching my baby fly across the ocean. Alyssa smiled, a tear finally escaping her eye and rolling down her cheek. She reached into her breast pocket and pulled out the silver watch, letting it dangle by its chain between them. He's with us, Mama, Alyssa whispered. He's sitting right there in the jump seat. I know he is, Beatrice said, wiping her daughter's tear away. Now go on and fly this plane. The people are waiting. 5 minutes later, a breathless but bright-eyed woman with auburn hair stepped onto the plane. Her name tag read Sarah, Purser. She took one look at Alyssa and offered a sharp, respectful nod. Captain Monroe reporting for duty, Sarah said efficiently. Welcome aboard, Sarah, Alyssa said warmly. This is my mother, Beatrice Monroe. She's in 2A. I'd appreciate it if you made sure she is very well taken care of. Sarah smiled warmly at Beatrice. It is an absolute honor, Mrs. Monroe. Let me get you settled in. Would you like a fresh glass of champagne? I think I'd love one, dear, Beatrice replied. Alyssa watched as Sarah escorted her mother back to her seat, fluffing a pillow for her, and returning with a crystal flute of sparkling wine. The businessman in 1A actually leaned over his partition and offered a polite apologetic nod to Beatrice, which she graciously returned. Satisfied that her mother was treated like royalty, Alyssa turned back toward the flight deck. She stepped over the threshold, closing the heavy reinforced steel door behind her. As the lock engaged with a solid definitive thud, she was back in her element. The cockpit of the Boeing 777 was a symphony of glowing screens, dials, and switches. Through the massive windshield, the sprawling expanse of the Atlanta airport stretched out before her, bathed in the golden hour light of the late afternoon. Everything all right back there, boss? First Officer Gable asked, looking over from the right seat, his hands resting on his kneeboard. Alyssa took her place in the left seat, the captain's seat. She strapped herself into the 5-point harness, adjusted her headset, and rested her hand on the massive thrust levers. She felt the heavy weight of the silver pocket watch pressing against her chest. She looked at her first officer, a fiercely determined smile spreading across her face. Everything is perfect, Tommy, Alyssa said. She keyed the radio, her voice echoing out across the tarmac, confident and in absolute control. Atlanta ground Meridian 408, heavy, is ready for pushback and engine start. Minutes later, the massive engines roared to life, shaking the cabin with a deep, vibrating power. As the plane taxied to the runway, Beatrice sat in 2A, sipping her champagne, looking out the window as the ground moved past. She closed her eyes as the engines spooled up to take off, thrust the sheer force pressing her back into the plush leather seat. The nose of the aircraft pitched upward, breaking free from the earth, soaring into the clouds. Beatrice smiled, listening to the ticking of an invisible watch, knowing her daughter was commanding the sky. High above the jagged coastline of Nova Scotia, the Boeing 777 sliced through the freezing night air, bathed in the ethereal silver glow of a full moon. Inside the first-class cabin, the chaos of the Atlanta tarmac felt like a distant, unpleasant dream. Soft amber mood lighting illuminated the aisles, and the quiet clinking of real silverware against porcelain echoed gently as passengers enjoyed their dinner service. Beatrice rested against her plush pillows, wrapped in a thick, monogrammed duvet. On her tray table sat a plate of perfectly seared filet mignon, a fresh garden salad, and a crystal glass of sparkling water. Sarah, the replacement purser, had treated her with a level of deference and warmth that brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. Every time Sarah passed seat 2A, she offered a genuine smile, ensuring Beatrice lacked nothing. "Excuse me, Mrs. Monroe." Beatrice turned her head. The businessman from seat 1A was standing in the aisle, looking remarkably humbled. He had traded his suit jacket for a comfortable cashmere sweater, and his posture was entirely devoid of the entitlement he had displayed hours earlier. "Yes," Beatrice replied cautiously. "My name is Robert Hayes." He introduced himself, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. I wanted to come over and sincerely apologize to you for my behavior on the ground." Beatrice paused, setting down her fork. She looked at him directly, her expression calm but firm. "I was impatient and I was rude." Robert continued, his voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping cabin. "I made assumptions based on a loud dispute, and I failed to recognize the profound disrespect you were experiencing. Watching your daughter step out of that cockpit, it was a massive wake-up call for me. You raised an incredible woman, and you did not deserve to be treated that way by anyone, least of all me." Beatrice studied his face for a long moment. She had spent a lifetime dealing with men like Robert, men who never looked twice at the people serving them, cleaning up after them, or standing in their way. But his apology was raw and genuine. "Thank you, Robert," Beatrice finally said, her voice softening. "I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot to hear it." "Have a wonderful time in London, Mrs. Monroe," Robert said with a respectful nod before returning to his suite. Forward of the galley, behind the reinforced steel door, the flight deck was dark, illuminated only by the complex, multicolored glow of the instrument panels. Captain Alyssa Monroe sat in the left seat, staring out the massive windshield at a blanket of stars so dense it looked like spilled diamonds on black velvet. "Still can't believe what happened back there," First Officer Thomas Gable murmured, adjusting the glowing dial on his navigation display. "Montgomery firing the gate supervisor on the spot. That's going to be the stuff of company legend by tomorrow morning." Alyssa kept her eyes on the horizon. "Montgomery did what he had to do. Aviation is built on trust, Tommy. The second a crew member weaponizes their authority out of prejudice, the entire safety structure collapses. If Brenda was willing to escalate a situation over a pocket watch just because my mother is a black woman, what happens when there's a real emergency in the cabin? Who else would she ignore or profile?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "You were right to ground it. Completely right." Alyssa reached up her fingers, grazing the breast pocket of her uniform. She could feel the heavy, familiar contour of Arthur's pocket watch pressing against her chest. She unbuttoned the flap, pulled the silver timepiece out, and let it rest in the palm of her hand. The hands ticked away, keeping perfect time, just as they had when her father was wiping grease off his hands on the Georgia tarmac. "My dad used to say that airplanes were time machines." Alyssa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He said if you flew fast enough, you could catch the sunrise before anyone else." "He sounds like a smart man," Thomas said warmly. "He was the best of us," Alyssa replied, slipping the watch safely back over her heart. "Let's bring this bird home, Tommy." Hours passed. The deep black of the night sky slowly gave way to a bruised purple, and then to a brilliant burning gold as the sun crested over the Irish Sea. The cabin slowly began to stir. Sarah moved through the aisles, offering hot towels and fresh coffee. At exactly 40 minutes to landing, a soft chime echoed through the Boeing 777. The overhead speakers crackled to life. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Monroe speaking from the flight deck." Beatrice sat up straight, her heart leaping at the sound of her daughter's professional, commanding voice, filling the massive aircraft. "We are currently beginning our initial descent into the London area. The weather in Heathrow is a beautiful 55 degrees with clear skies, and we are expecting to touch down right on schedule. I want to thank you all for your patience during our delayed departure from Atlanta." Alyssa paused. In the cockpit, she took a deep breath, clutching the microphone. "Before we prepare for landing, I would like to take a moment of personal privilege. Today is a very special day. Not only is this my inaugural transatlantic flight as a captain for Meridian Airlines, but it is also a milestone made possible by a VIP sitting in first class, seat 2A. My mother, Beatrice Monroe." A murmur of delight rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to look toward the front. "My mother worked double shifts at a hospital for 30 years to put me through flight school." Alyssa's voice echoed thick with pride and unshed tears. "She sacrificed everything so I could touch the sky, and she brought a piece of my late father with her today, a man who fixed these beautiful machines his whole life, but never got to fly on one. So to my dad, watching from above, and to my mother in seat 2A, thank you. We made it." The entire first-class cabin erupted into applause. Robert Hayes stood up and clapped loudly. Passengers from the business class section behind the curtain joined in. Beatrice covered her face with her hands, tears of overwhelming joy and absolute vindication streaming down her cheeks. She was not a nuisance. She was not a threat. She was the mother of the captain, and the whole world was going to know it. The descent was flawless. As the heavy wheels of the Boeing 737 touched down on the Heathrow runway, kissing the asphalt with barely a bump, a final round of applause broke out in the cabin. Alyssa had greased the landing. When the aircraft finally parked at the gate and the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers began to gather their belongings. As Beatrice stepped out of her seat, Robert Hayes stepped aside, gesturing for her to go first. "After you, Mrs. Monroe," Robert said warmly. Beatrice walked off the plane, thanking Sarah on the way out. She stood in the carpeted terminal of London Heathrow, watching the crowds of travelers rushing past. But she didn't head for baggage claim. She stood firmly by the gate, waiting. 10 minutes later, the flight crew disembarked. And there she was. Captain Alyssa Monroe walked up the jet bridge, her uniform immaculate, pulling her black roller bag behind her. When she saw her mother waiting, the professional captain vanished, and the daughter ran forward. They collided in a fierce, crushing embrace, holding each other as the bustling London airport swirled around them. "You did it, baby," Beatrice whispered into her daughter's shoulder, crying freely now. "You flew us all the way." Alyssa pulled back, her own eyes wet, and placed her hand over her heart, right where the silver watch rested. "No, Mama," Alyssa smiled, her voice radiating pure love and fierce triumph. "We flew us all the way. Family bonds and sheer determination can shatter any ceiling the world tries to build over you." Beatrice and Alyssa's journey is a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't come from a name tag or a uniform. It comes from the sacrifices we make for the people we love, and the courage to stand up against injustice, no matter where it happens. This story proves that when we uplift each other, we can literally touch the sky. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who inspires you, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories.